they're introducing a finishing Mori. It allows the killer to execute the final survivor without needing an offering. This is a slight buff for killers. There are two scenarios that I want you to think about here. So the first scenario is that there's a survivor who has Saboteur. Two survivors have already escaped the match. Then there's one survivor, the killer downs them, and then they're on their way to hook that survivor. And then the other survivor is a Saboteur. He goes and sabotages the hook so the killer can't hook them. So then the killer is forced to drop that survivor, and then the killer chases the other survivor out of the match. So normally in the live servers, the down survivor would be able to crawl away to the gate, and if the killer tried to pick them up again, then he would wiggle out before he could make it back to the hook because he has a wiggle progress because of the Saboteur. But with this change, if the killer runs out the Saboteur before the down survivor can make it out of the gate, then he can just Mori him. And then that's an extra kill that the killer wouldn't normally have gotten in the live servers. So that's kind of an issue for me. It reduces the effectiveness of sabotage. The other scenario is that there's two survivors left. There are still generators remaining. He downs one survivor. He's able to hook him. And then the other survivor, he got unhooked recently, so he has D-strike or something. In a normal game, the killer would have to pick him up to finish him off, but instead he can just Mori him. It basically ruins endgame sabotage plays, and it ruins endgame decisive strike plays. Now, there may be other scenarios I'm not thinking of, but those are the two that come to mind. Okay, but we do have quite a few buffs for survivor perks. Power of 2 and Collective Stealth both got similar buffs, which is the new range is 16 meters, there's no longer a cooldown, and it no longer deactivates if you get hurt. So this makes it a lot more useful in just any scenario. And I think that it'll complement healing builds very well, as long as you stick with the survivor that you healed. Then there's Corrective Action. The first thing is that it no longer only applies to generators. You can now use it in other skill check scenarios like healing. It corrects failed skill checks for your allies. And it doesn't just turn them into good skill checks anymore, it turns them into great skill checks. Now, when I was thinking about this, it's pretty funny. I don't know if the developers thought about this scenario, but what if two survivors have hyperfocus and corrective action? What would happen if they did not think about this scenario? Both survivors would be able to fail every single skill check, and because this perk turns failed skill checks into great skill checks, both hyperfocus and corrective action, you get a token every time that happens. So then they could get maxed out hyperfocus stacks and keep their corrective action stacks maxed out too. They're not even skill checks anymore, they're like skill-less checks. You could just AFK and do gens and get really fast gen times with this. Maybe they thought of that, I don't know, but we'll see when it goes live. Okay, they buffed inner focus, and they made this so you have an increased duration to the aura reading. They doubled the duration, which is very strong, but they also removed the range requirements, so you don't need to be anywhere near the killer anymore to see their aura. The thing about this perk is that it will trigger anytime someone loses a health state for any reason. So somebody could lose a health state from doing something like using For the People or using Plot Twist, and then you'll be able to see the killer's aura from anywhere. It might be strong. The thing that keeps it balanced, in my opinion, is the fact that the killers have so many different perks and add-ons, and also just normal killer powers that incorporate undetectable into their kits. So I don't think it's going to be overpowered. I could see people maybe using it now. In certain builds, maybe they use like Eyes of Belmont with inner focus, and they have 12 seconds of vision on the killer anytime somebody gets hurt, so they can see the killer almost the entire match. Yeah, we'll see how that plays out. We also have We're Gonna Live Forever. This perk got a buff. They increased the healing speed by plus 50%. So this will decrease the healing time from 16 seconds to almost 6 seconds. And that is very fast. It's super fast. But there aren't that many instances where you're going to cast survivors in the dying state. Those are pretty niche scenarios because it's completely up to the killer whether they leave survivors in the dying state. They usually just hook them, right? So there's that element to it, the increased healing speed. But then they also made it so endurance no longer has a requirement to be activated. Every time you pick somebody up, they will get endurance. It's really just a straight buff for We're Gonna Live Forever. I don't know if people are going to use it because, like I said, it's a very narrow use case. But for people who like to swoop in and save their allies in those risky scenarios, this could be a good choice. Okay, Poised. They buff this. When you first start repairing a gen, you can see the killer's aura for 6 seconds. It just gives you a little bit more situational awareness. I don't know if it's that good, but if you time it properly, it could be very useful. I mean, I can imagine a scenario where it's like the end game and the final gen is about to pop, and you're standing next to a generator that you know you haven't touched yet. So once you know the last gen is about to pop, you touch the gen you haven't touched all game, and then you'll be able to see where the killer is. And that will almost guarantee that you pick the correct exit gate to start opening. The other thing is that they increased the duration of the scratch marks being hidden from 10 to 14 seconds. I don't know. I mean, I've never really used this perk. I don't think it's that useful because of how random the gen popping can be. This activates anytime you or a teammate pops a gen. So whenever the gen pops, you could either be in a chase and it could be very useful, or you could just be sitting on a gen and then it does nothing. But maybe this buff will convince some people to use it. It's not going to convince me, but some people might like it. Okay, Bloodrush. This got a huge buff. What they essentially did to Bloodrush is that they turned it into an anti-tunneling perk. So the moment you get unhooked, this perk activates. You have 60 seconds to use an exhaustion perk. And then after you use the exhaustion perk, your exhaustion meter resets. So you can use the exhaustion perk again. And obviously that's very strong. You can sprint burst twice in a row. You can bounce landing twice. It also no longer makes you broken. So that's a big buff as well. And I think a lot more people are going to be using this. People who know that they're going to get hooked or they're going to get tunneled because they're strong loopers. It's going to be meta. Then we have Quick Gambit, which also got a sizable buff. When you're being chased, you can now see the auras of all your teammates. It helps you prevent yourself from running into your allies during your chase. It also has a cooldown upon losing a health state, so the benefits of this perk disappear after you're injured. Reduced repair speed bonus, so it was 8% before this, but now it's 5%. That is the only nerf to this. The flip side is that there's no longer a limited range to this perk, so you can be looping the killer from anywhere on the map, and your entire team will get 5% faster generator repair speed. So yeah, I would say it's a pretty good buff. I'm not sure if people will use it. It doesn't really do that much for your survival. It's really just something to benefit your team if you feel like you're a strong looper and you don't need 4 perks, you can live with 3. Then you can pick Quick Gambit to help everybody get out faster. Then we have Distortion. I'm really mad about Distortion, what they did to it, because Distortion is probably my main perk. It's one of my favorite perks. It helps me stay stealthy during my matches, and it helps me know what perks a killer is using. It provides so much information. So instead of having 3 tokens, it has no tokens. Instead, it just activates once and then it deactivates. And in order to reactivate the perk, you have to get chased. They did increase the duration to 12 seconds, up from 10 seconds, but there's very few aura reading perks the killer has that last more than 10 seconds. There's basically none. So yeah, not happy about this. Like, what am I going to use now? I don't know. It's like Spine Chill's dead. They killed Spine Chill years ago. They never made it any better. Now they killed Distortion. What's left to hide yourself from the wall hacks? It's like the killer's going to know where you are all the time now. On the flip side, I could see the other arguments. Like, it's not fun not being able to find survivors as a killer. It's like everybody plays DBD for the chase, right? They love being chased. They love chasing. That's where all the action is. And if players are hiding all the time, then you're not getting that. So I can understand that argument. But still, I'm salty about this because there's already a counter to Distortion, and that was to play stealthy killers. Like, it wasn't always useful. Sometimes I would have Distortion and it wouldn't do anything for me. The killer wouldn't bring any aura rating perks or add-ons. They wouldn't be playing a killer that had any sort of detection. So my Distortion was just sitting at 3 stacks the whole game, and it was a useless perk. So that is the gamble with Distortion. It's like, okay, I brought this perk. It's like insurance against being spied on. I don't know. I'll have to, when it goes live, I'll test it out and see how bad it really is. Lucky Star got a pretty nice buff here. It suppresses grunts of pain and pools of blood for as long as you are inside the locker, and it also lingers for 30 seconds after exiting the locker. This is a very nice stealth perk now. It's a little alternative to Iron Will. And as you know, Iron Will doesn't activate when you have a exhaustion perk. Now for killer perks, Genetic Limits got, what is this? I would say it's probably a buff. Probably a buff. So it used to be that after a survivor got healed, they would suffer from exhaustion for, I think, 30, 40 seconds, which is a pretty long time. But instead, they made it so anytime a survivor loses a health state by any means, then they suffer exhaustion. I think this will catch a lot of survivors by surprise. They'll be getting chased by the killer, they'll get hit, and then they might not see that they got inflicted with genetic limits. So then they'll try to use something like balanced landing or lithe, and it just won't activate because, genetic limits doesn't let you use your exhaustion anymore. Leverage got a rework. When a survivor performs an unhook, their healing speed is reduced by 50% for 30 seconds. I think the survivors will feel that a lot more than what it is currently. They're going to have to reconsider whether they heal now or they wait 30 seconds and heal later. Okay, then we have Thwack. This got a pretty nice buff as well. So you'll start with 3 tokens. Anytime you break a pallet or a wall, all survivors within 24 meters will scream and reveal their location. So it's a nice little situational awareness detection perk. It activates whenever you break something. And you also get tokens back after hooking a survivor. So you could potentially activate this perk like, I would say in a normal match, you might get like 8 or 9 hooks. You can use this perk, who knows, like 11 times. The issue I have with Thwack is that when it comes to breaking walls, you want to break them as soon as possible, honestly, because you just don't want those in your chases. So whenever there's a wall nearby and you have some time, like you're not doing anything, you just break it naturally. If you have Thwack equipped and you break the wall and you're not really looking for anybody at the time, you're breaking the wall, then you just wasted a token and it's not really doing anything for you. And then, like, let's say you're in a chase and you break a pallet and you have Thwack. Well, you already know where the survivor is that you're chasing. You already know where they are, so you don't need them to get revealed to you. So it's still kind of iffy. I still don't like Thwack very much. Also, machine learning got I think it's more of a quality of life improvement, but basically after you damage a gen, that generator becomes compromised, and then once a survivor finishes the gen that you compromised, you gain a large haste effect, and you also gain undetectable. So those are 2 pretty strong benefits, obviously. You're faster and survivors can't see your aura or hear you coming, but it does require a survivor to finish a gen, which obviously you don't want to happen. You don't want the survivors to finish any gens if possible. And machine learning can be a sort of sneaky way of giving yourself undetectable and making yourself faster. Because it's like, okay, so when you're playing Survivor and you're like an experienced player, you are looking for certain cues that tell you what perks the killer has. And machine learning is one of these niche perks where the condition to activate it is pretty subtle. Because nobody really expects the killer to gain undetectable from you accomplishing your objective. Rare thing, in my opinion. I don't see many people using machine learning, so it can definitely catch survivors off guard, this perk. Okay, Deathbound got a pretty nice buff. The big problem I had with this perk was that there are too many conditions to activate it, to keep it active. But they removed those conditions. So now the way it works is that anytime a survivor heals another survivor, the healer gains Oblivious, which makes them a lot easier to sneak up on. Is there any downside to this? Well, yes. They can negate the Oblivious effect as long as the healer stays within 8 meters of the healed survivor. But also, if they do that, then if you happen to find those 2 survivors, then you're disrupting 2 survivors at once. So yes, it does encourage the survivors to group up together to prevent the healer from being oblivious, but that is useful for certain killers. It's useful for killers who have like a multi-hit attack. Let's say Plague, for example. She can hit multiple survivors with her vomits. Leatherface with his chainsaw. You have Doctor with his shock therapy. Legion could be an option. So there's a lot of killers who have a potential to make good use of Deathbound. Okay, next up we have Zanshin Tactics. What it does is it reveals the survivor's aura anytime they're within 6 meters of a drop pallet. This makes it almost impossible to mind game the killer around a drop pallet. It's not going to be useful in all situations. It's mostly going to be useful in situations where you don't have direct line of sight on the survivor, basically. Like, let's say there is a pallet and you have a tall wall between you and the survivor. Well, you can break line of sight with a survivor, and because you have this perk, you have an advantage because you can see the survivor, but they can't see you. All right, next up we have Dead Man Switch. Now, they nerfed this. Well, I don't know if it's called a nerf really, but basically it only applies to one generator now. It used to be, if a survivor stops working on a generator after you hook a survivor, that generator gets blocked for 30 seconds. And that could apply to multiple generators at one time, which could almost completely shut down survivors' generator progress for that period of time if they let go of it. It's a pretty strong combination for certain perks like pain resonance, But with this change, it only applies to the first generator that a survivor lets go of. However, they increase the duration from 30 seconds to 50 seconds, so that one generator that they let go of is going to be shut down for almost a full minute. I think it's healthier because if all the generators, potentially like all of them, could be blocked with this because the survivors could let go of one by accident or something, then nobody can work on that for up to 30 seconds. It's like you have these survivors who are just standing around. It's like, oh, well, the generator's blocked. I literally can't do anything. So yeah, I think it's better. I think it's healthier for the game to have it work like this. Blood Echo no longer has a cooldown, but the duration is reduced to 30 seconds. I believe the cooldown for Blood Echo was a full minute, which meant that if you got multiple hooks in a short period of time, Blood Echo would not activate again. So that sort of discouraged you from hooking until the cooldown was up again. And that could be kind of awkward, just waiting for your perk to get off cooldown. Somebody might like this change. Crowd control, this got a pretty scary buff. So instead of the vault locations being blocked for a period of time, they are now blocked indefinitely. Let's say a survivor vaults any window. That window is going to be permanently blocked for the entire match until the Hex Totem gets cleansed. And that can apply to up to 5 windows at a time. That's pretty scary. If the killer does a good job at guarding their totem, they can completely shut down up to 5 windows on the map. Now, there is a little bit of counterplay to this. You can vault windows on the edges of the map. You have those really awful loops, like those tiny little Z-walls on the outskirts of the map, or just windows nobody wants to use because they're so unsafe. If you vault those, you can unblock previously blocked windows that are more important. But it's still a lot more dangerous now. You want to cleanse this hex immediately once you know that it's active. Predator got a major rework, so it no longer caused the scratch marks to appear closer together because some players were saying that this made the scratch marks harder to see. They completely got rid of the scratch mark component, and now, anytime a survivor escapes a chase, their aura gets revealed for 6 seconds. I kind of have a problem with this because if a survivor escapes a chase, then that means that they did something right. They juked you, or they made you give up somehow. Maybe they stunned you, maybe they blinded you. They outplayed you somehow, usually. But Predator sort of negates that. It's just like, oh, hey, you messed up your chase, but here you go. We're going to tell you where the survivor is anyway, so you can chase them again. They've completely killed stealth at this point. There is no stealthing. There's so many things that can reveal your position in this game. If you're near a locker, they could see you with darkness revealed. If you're near a generator, they can see you with nowhere to hide. If you spawn into the map, they will see you with Lethal Pursuer. It's like there's no getting away from this. They have wall hacks the entire time, basically. And then there's add-ons you have to consider. Time to use Residual Manifest with Champion of Light. I mean, it's an option, but even then, not all killers are going to break the pallets. Some don't even need to break pallets. So then, it's like, how are you going to blind them? I'm not happy about the Predator thing, but it's not just a Predator thing. It's also the Distortion nerf as well. It kind of makes me mad that they did that to Distortion. Okay, then we have a couple killer updates here. I think a lot of people will enjoy this one. Spell Merchant got nerfed. The hindered penalty has been cut in half when you're scanned by a drone, so it's easier to loop her even if there's a drone in the loop. She also no longer gains haste after scanning a survivor, so she's going to run at the same speed that normal killers do. Currently, there are 2 scanning lines for the drones, which can make them pretty hard to dodge during a chase, so they reduce the scanning lines to 1. The drone is still going to hinder you during your looping, but it's not going to be nearly as annoying to deal with as 2 scanning lines going around. Probably a healthy change. Hillbilly got a slight nerf. His attack cooldown after missing a chainsaw was increased by a fraction of a second. They also reduced the frequency where he gains his overdrive, his blue chainsaw, the fiery thing. And they also decreased the duration of it to 8 seconds. It used to be 15, so. And I think that's good because I have been saying for a while that Hillbilly was a little overpowered. He needed more of a punishment for missing his chainsaw, and his overdrive needed to stop kicking in so frequently. Twins got a nerf here. When Victor gets crushed, you have to wait 20 seconds before you can use him again, which is pretty painful to wait. At the same time, Victor can be kind of oppressive, So it gives survivors more breathing room. So yeah, I could see it both ways. It's a nice thing for survivors, and then the killer's just like, oh well, Victor is pretty strong. I guess this is to balance him out. And then there is a cooldown increase to Victor's pounce attack. It's 0.5 seconds, so it makes it a little easier for survivors to squish him after missing a pounce. I think there's a lot of scenarios where if a survivor had 0.5 seconds more, they could squish him. This will make a lot of survivors happy, I think. Unknown. Is this a buff or a nerf? I mean, they kind of nerfed him, but then they kind of buffed him too. He can start moving again sooner after teleporting. They also made it so when you start charging up your power, your movement speed will now decrease faster. Basically, if you try to commit to using your power, it's going to punish you sooner. It's like, okay, you can't just like pop in and out of your range attack whenever you want to. It's going to penalize you with more movement speed penalty. I do think that's probably a good thing because there should be a penalty to having to change your mind. It's like, oh no, I can't actually hit that. Well, then you have to pay the price. You have to be slow for a little bit. Overall, there are some good and bad changes for a lot of these things. I'm just mostly sad about stealth dying. Basically, stealth is dead. But anyways, that's the new patch for you.